Checking for sound. London is a place for me. London, this lovely city. You can go to France or America, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City. Believe me, I'm speaking broad-mindedly. Glad to know my mother country. I've been traveling to countries years ago, but this is the place I wanted to know. London, that place is for me. Check. Audio. To live in London, you are really comfortable, because the English people are very much sociable. They take you here and they take you there. They make you feel like a millionaire. London, that's the place for me. Night when you at night when you have nothing to do, you can take a walk down Shaftesbury Avenue. There you will laugh and talk and enjoy the breeze, admire the beautiful scenery of London. That's the place for me. Yes, I cannot complain of the time that I have spent. I mean, my life in London, it was really magnificent. I have every comfort and every sport, and my residence is in Hampton Court. So London, that's the place for me. London, that's the place for me. London, that lovely city. You can go to France or America, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City. Yeah. Thank you. Clap on yourself. Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful afternoon outside and even inside here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Please stand for the national anthem.
Eternal Father, Father, bless our land. Guide us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil powers. Be our light through countless hours. To all leaders, great defenders, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Teach us true respect for all. Stir response to duty's call. Strengthen us the will to cherish. Give us vision lest we perish. Knowledge send us, Heavenly Father, grant true wisdom from above. Everybody, justice. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Clap on yourself.
Please be seated. Greetings from Jamaica to the world. Wherever you are listening or watching, welcome to the 75th commemorative celebration of the Windrush generation. It's happening here in the Hugh Lawson Shearer building on the waterfront overlooking the 7th largest natural harbor in the world. You may applaud. Isn't that something? Yes, it is. Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. The Honorable Orlando Terrelong, Member of Parliament, State Minister in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. That is where he's coming from. Where he is now is right where he is. And that's right here as Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Can I say welcome? Can we all welcome our newly installed Minister of State in the ministry? His Excellency Hugo Verbiest, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps and Belgian Ambassador, welcome. Her Excellency Ms. Judith Slater, British High Commissioner to Jamaica. And did we hear her singing, "London is the place to be"? Permanent Secretaries, Ambassador Janice Miller, Officer in Charge, MFAFT, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, of course. National or Permanent Secretaries, Ambassador Sheila Seeley Monteith and Mr. Denzel Thorpe. National Librarian, Ms. Beverly Lashley. other heads of agencies, executives, and cultural leaders, esteemed panelists, and you'll meet them not too long from now, members of the diaspora, ladies and gentlemen all, thank you so much for being a part of this experience. And we're looking forward to a very engaging discussion a little later on. In the meantime, we're going to hear from Ambassador Janice Miller, Officer in Charge, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And then we will have other presentations by speakers to come. But for right now, let's welcome Ambassador Janice Miller.
Senator the Honourable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. The Honourable Analdo Terrelong, Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, who is representing today the Honourable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports. Her Excellency, Ms. Judith Slater, British High Commissioner to Jamaica. Ms. Beverly Lashley, National Librarian and CEO at the National Library of Jamaica. Other representatives from the Diplomatic Corps, representatives from the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, Mr. Royan Green, Director Special Programs, National Library of Jamaica, members of the diaspora here physically and joining us online. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant good afternoon to you all. On behalf of Ambassador Sheila Sealy-Monteith, Permanent Secretary, I am pleased to welcome you to the Kingston Hall of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. We are gathered here today to commemorate Windrush 75 under the theme Windrush 75, Reflections from Kingston Harbour. It is therefore opportune that we are doing so overlooking the very harbour from which the HMT Empire Windrush departed on its historical sojourn to Britain. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade is honoured to partner with the National Library of Jamaica for this panel discussion, which recognises and commemorates the movement of a significant number of Jamaicans and Caribbean persons to Britain. That event is remarkable, not only in terms of the impact it had on the persons themselves, but it also assisted in post-World War II reconstruction in Britain, as well as in the creation of one of the largest cosmopolitan diaspora communities in Europe. It also led to the introduction of West Indian culture in Britain, including through music such as ska and reggae, as well as through West Indian literature, West Indian food, and so much more. Yet, even having been invited as subjects of the United Kingdom and colonies, the persons of the Windrush generation were to endure hostility and hardships that were entirely unexpected and certainly undeserved. Notwithstanding, they and their descendants have shown a great determination, dignity, pride, kindness, and ambition reminiscent of their Jamaican spirit. In tribute to this, we must continue to be appreciative and demonstrative in recognizing the Windrush generation. During today's panel discussions, Mr. Herbie Miller, Director of the Jamaica Music Museum of the Institute of Jamaica, Mr. Rudy Page, Diaspora Consultant and CEO of Making Connections Work, Mr. Earl Moxham, Senior Journalist of the RJR Group, Dr. Hilary Hickling, Migration Researcher, and Reverend Dr. Dave Goss, Director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, will provide perspectives on the impact and trends in Jamaican migration, the history of Windrush, and share stories from the Windrush experience. We are also pleased that Senator the Honourable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, a keen advocate for the rights of the Windrush generation and a strong supporter of the diaspora, will also bring remarks. As we listen to the contributions to be made, may the discussions add greatly to our individual and collective understanding of the significance of the Windrush experience. May we also continue to truly appreciate the invaluable contributions of the Windrush generation to Jamaica, their homeland, and to the United Kingdom, their chosen home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Miller. And now remarks from Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Malcolm, the voice known far and wide and across many an ocean and sea by all our diaspora communities. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing in this important celebration. The Honorable Alanda Terrelong, newly appointed Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. We're going to, ladies and gentlemen, consider this his transitional engagement, because you would have looked at the program for today and it will have said that following me there will be remarks from the Honorable Olivia Grange. You will see that the person who takes the podium will not be her, and she will, of course, be ably represented by Minister Terrelong. So this is really a transitional event for him. We're welcoming him here today, and I thank you for joining us in that, and also welcoming the remarks that he will bring on behalf of Minister Grange, who unfortunately could not split herself in two and had to be at an event in Buff Bay at this time. Ambassador Janice Miller, Officer in Charge, Your Excellency Judith Slater, British High Commissioner, Ambassador Seth George Ramakan, our former Jamaican High Commissioner to the Court of St. James, Ms. Beverly Lashley, National Librarian, our distinguished panelists here today, our legacy partners, representatives of other government agencies, and other distinguished guests, members of the diaspora who are here today. And pardon me, I can't call out all names, but I just want to recognize Professor Levermore and Ms. Lindsay, foremost philanthropist and foremost academician on Windrush matters. And I know all of you know who he is, and Ms. Lindsay you may have met, and other members of the diaspora here with us here today, members of my wonderful Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade team. Good afternoon. And please accept my very warm and personal welcome to the Foreign Ministry's headquarters here at the Hugh Lawson Shearer Building. We're delighted to host you here today and to honor, in particular, and to commemorate a seminal moment in history. I want to offer a special welcome, a particularly special welcome, rather, to those persons who are joining us who are members of the Windrush generation or descendants of members of the Windrush generation. I want to thank you for making the time for being with us today, whether you are online or physically present here. We truly, truly value your presence. 75 years ago, the HMT Empire Windrush departed the Kingston Harbor from Victoria Pier, just a stone's throw from where we are gathered today. And they headed to the Tilbury Docks in the United Kingdom. Today, that journey, made by almost 600 persons who joined from Jamaica, in addition to others from the Caribbean, remains synonymous with sacrifice, with nation building, with community. Ladies and gentlemen, with hopes of personal, family, and community development etched deeply in their hearts, the Windrush generation left behind all they knew and loved in Jamaica and the Caribbean. In Britain, they were critical to the significant rebuilding efforts following the destruction caused by the Second World War, including filling labor shortages and serving in critical jobs such as bus drivers, nurses, and factory workers. But the Windrush generation did not just answer Britain's call for help to stabilize and fix its post-war economy. They did so much more, enriching the social, cultural, political, and religious life of Britain. And as my counterpart, the Right Honorable James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, put it in his visit to Jamaica last week, It was the Windrush generation that revitalized many towns and areas in Britain, including in London, the now vibrant Notting Hill. It was our culture, our energy, and our beings that changed the flavor of Britain. Of immeasurable significance is also the simultaneous contributions made to Jamaica's development by the Windrush generation. The historic migration of Jamaican nationals laid the foundation for the development of what is now a robust Jamaican diaspora in the UK, spanning several generations. So as I pay tribute to this group of pioneers, I acknowledge also fellow Jamaicans in the diaspora, and again, particularly those of the Windrush generation and their descendants. I'm particularly moved by the exploits of the Windrush generation as the struggle of this group of persons straddling several decades has demonstrated most vividly the fundamental traits of Jamaican character and personality. I've been deeply touched by their testimonies and accounts of their drive and their tenacity and their accomplishments in spite of the challenges of unforeseen circumstances and in spite of obstacles. And I know that those of you who have become aware of the work by Mr. Fairweather that is kindly displayed at the entrance of Kingston Hall, that you'll take an opportunity to avail yourself of a copy of this book so that you too can share in some of the testimonials which are indeed accurately portrayed and very sensitively and movingly, I think, demonstrated. So thank you, Mr. Fairweather, also for being with us today, and thank you for sharing your writings with the world. We very much appreciate that, and it's appropriate that you're with us today. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes without saying that having made great sacrifice to leave all they knew and loved, having endured, battled, and overcome to a great extent the challenges of adjusting to a new country, a new climate, and having contributed so much to that new country, that the Windrush generation and their descendants, as well as the government of Jamaica and concerned governments across the Caribbean, were rightfully angered by the immigration policy that negatively affected the Windrush generation, who throughout the years had exercised so much forbearance and gave so much. We're pleased, therefore, that particularly since 2017, positive resolutions have been achieved. The struggle for justice has been greatly assisted by strong and sustained advocacy and lobby efforts by a wide cross-section of stakeholders. Special mention must be made of members of the Jamaican diaspora across the UK, the church, community, business leaders, civil society, grassroots community organizations, academia, and even some UK parliamentarians. Commonwealth heads of government, including CARICOM heads, also played a key role. Notably, Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness in 2018 urged the British government to undertake measures to, and I quote, right the wrongs. And the Jamaican High Commission has also been actively engaged with the various advocacy groups, utilizing all available diplomatic channels to keep this matter at the forefront of discussions with the UK government. And again, it's entirely appropriate that you're with us today, High Commissioner Ramakan, as you were High Commissioner at the time that the controversy reached its heights, and your delicate management of sensitive issues, as well as your harnessing of the community, is well remembered and deeply respected by all your CARICOM colleagues and, of course, the wider community in UK. So thank you for all your efforts, sir. Did remarkable work. Thank you, yes. Thank you. We recognize the corrective measures undertaken by the British government, including the Windrush Compensation Scheme launched in 2019, the Windrush Community Fund set up to strengthen and drive a public awareness campaign on the scheme, and the Windrush Lessons Learned Review, along with its comprehensive improvement plan, all aimed at compensatory relief and restitution for the generation of the Windrush generation and their descendants. Earlier this year, funding in the amount of £3.75 million was dedicated to the Windrush grant scheme, building on last year's £500,000 allocated to 35 groups across the British territories. This has assisted in the declaration of Windrush Day in 2022, which was itself also an outcome of lobby efforts. A moment of Jamaican pride, as well as Windrush pride, was marked when internationally renowned Jamaican sculptor Basil Watson CD was selected to create the Windrush Monument, unveiled at London's Waterloo Station in 2022. This is a permanent and fitting memorial of the significant contribution of the Windrush generation to the development of the UK, and long may it stand. As recently as last week, Windrush featured on the agenda of 2 high-level meetings last week with my UK counterpart. While we acknowledged the efforts made by the UK government to address the wrongs, I reiterated the need for continued attention to addressing ongoing concerns stated by the community and urged timely completion of the implemented redress mechanisms under the compensation scheme. I also spoke of the importance of our ensuring that the word controversy does not eclipse the victories and positive contribution of this generation. This is a belief I hold very deeply and personally, and so it is that I believe that this series of events planned to commemorate Windrush 75 are so very important. Ladies and gentlemen, as we commemorate this historic moment, the start of the Windrush generation, we appreciate the importance it has played in the wider fabric of Jamaican contributions to the world, particularly through the diaspora. Victoria Pier has been the launch pad of many a historic journey, including those undertaken by numerous Jamaicans to participate in the building of the Panama Canal, the construction of the railway in Belize, and to work in the United Fruit Company in other Caribbean countries. We're proud of our people who have made immense contributions regionally and across the globe. And here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we are proud to play a lead role in strengthening the engagement between Jamaica and our diaspora. The Foreign Ministry is pleased, therefore, to partner with the National Library of Jamaica in hosting this panel discussion, and I want to commend Ms. Lashley and her team for organizing the commemorative events being held for this year to mark Windrush 75. In addition to the Windrush Traveling Exhibition and others, we must ensure that they are sustained and maintained so that this rich legacy is never forgotten. In closing, I use this opportunity to reiterate that the Ministry remains committed to the achievement of just outcomes for the Windrush generation and their descendants, and we commend the Jamaican diaspora in the UK for their active role in achieving the positive outcomes that have served thus far to reaffirm their sense of belonging and identity. We also celebrate their legacy of service and indeed their contributions across various fields, including academia, culture, technology, arts, and the creative industries, medicine, and communication. So as we celebrate, as we remember, as we reflect, I look forward to the insights of the distinguished panelists and experts who will speak today. They will undoubtedly edify all of us here in attendance and will enrich our perspectives on the Windrush generation. I thank you once more for making the time to share in this commemorative activity with us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Johnson-Smith. And now we're about to hear from our next speaker for the very first time. For the very first time in his capacity, not officially yet? Oh. No, I saw that as well, but I'm just saying, he's here today in his capacity as a representative of the Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. However, he is now taking up his position as Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Now that's a big deal. Please welcome the Honorable Orlando Terrelon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Good afternoon to you all, and whilst the protocol has already been observed, allow me please just to say a very special thank you to Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and to the entire team here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for the warm welcome with which I was received this morning. It truly is indeed a great honor and privilege to serve my nation and the people in this capacity. It is certainly a moment that I have looked forward to, that I have contemplated throughout my career as an attorney and also a politician. And so I want to thank the Prime Minister publicly certainly for the high level of confidence he has reposed in me to be able to take on this mammoth task. From my discussions with Minister Johnson-Smith, she has outlined certain areas that I will deal with directly, and I want to thank her for her ongoing show of support as I look forward to, again, serve the people of Jamaica in this role. Thank you, HMS. Her Excellency, Miss Judith Slater, British High Commissioner, our officer in charge at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Miss Janice Miller, and members of the team here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, heads of agencies, cultural leaders, former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Mr. Seth George Ramakan, Miss Lashley and the team from the National Library Services, and also the team here from MacJess, our event chair, Mr. Dervan Malcolm, our esteemed panelists, members of the diaspora here and online, ladies and gentlemen all. I am indeed delighted to deliver remarks on behalf of the Honourable Olivia Babsy-Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, and once more apologize for her not being able to be here today as she is at an event commemorating Africa Day. Both observances share what we can be seen as reclaiming and heralding a narrative of triumph for our people of Jamaica. Some 75 years ago, the HMT Empire, Windrush, set sail from Jamaica to Britain. This ship and others brought Jamaicans and members from across the Caribbean to Britain, approximately 1,027 passengers who took a month-long voyage from Jamaica to London. Of course, more than 800 passengers gave their last country of residence as somewhere in the Caribbean, and the vast majority were noted to be Jamaican. The Windrush generation refers to Caribbean nationals who arrived in Great Britain as immigrants under the Immigration Act of 1948. This act granted the unskilled workers and some veterans entry into the country and also British citizenship. From 1948 until about 1973, many Caribbean nationals, the majority being Jamaicans, took up the offer then held by the British government to sail to that country in order to seek work opportunities. Full of hope, they set sail for Britain as citizens of the British Empire, arriving in the mother country with good intent. Due to successful advertisements from the United Kingdom, thousands more from Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados traveled with their children. Of course, no passports were then necessary to work and begin a new life. When our forefathers, brothers, and sisters arrived in Britain, they offloaded grips, suitcases, as they are called now, filled with hope. They brought with them their music, religion, dress, food, and customs, which we know today have deeply influenced British culture. On the 22nd day of June 1948, the Windrush arrived at Tilbury Docks in Essex, the first stop for the British Caribbean citizens before traveling onwards towards London. Pathé News footage captured the passengers' arrival, and the report explained that many of the migrants were ex-servicemen who already knew London and had served that country during the Great War. Most were now job seekers, but others were there to finish their trades and education. They paid approximately £28 for their passage and another £5 when they sailed. The Pathé News report ended with a live performance from calypso singer Aldwin Roberts, known by the stage name Lord Kitchener, singing the specially written song, "London is the Place for Me." But the welcome recorded by the Pathé footage does not tell the full story. Just 2 days after the Windrush docked, a group of 11 Labour MPs wrote to the Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, calling for a halt to the influx of coloured people. Attlee's reply was that it would be a great mistake to take the emigration of this Jamaican party to the United Kingdom too seriously. Too seriously. Rather, not serious enough was the cry of many migrants who faced harsh conditions in their transition into British life. It was reported that 236 people who had no place to stay were temporarily housed in the deep-level air raid shelter in Clapham Common. The nearest employment exchange to the shelter was in Brixton. Many of the original migrants eventually found accommodation in the area, which is how Brixton became well known as a Black British community. Living conditions were oftentimes said to be low in standards and the rent high. Many families were living cheek by jowl in 1 or 2 rooms, frequently having to double up to share beds depending on the shift patterns. The Windrush generation undertook a variety of jobs, some low-paying, but they did this with great pride to help their families. Jobs included the production of steel, coal, iron, and food, as well as roles in running public transportation and staffing the NHS. One of the biggest employers was, in fact, the London Transport. Today, there are approximately 800,000 Jamaican immigrants living in the UK. Despite 75 years of Caribbean people settling in Britain, most of the Windrush generation and their descendants continue to seek a better life in the UK. For them, the UK is home, and they want to be happy in this, their new society. Notwithstanding issues over the past, the Windrush generation has contributed to the intellectual, cultural, and political landscape in Britain. They have been noted university professors, successful athletes, popular musicians, authors, and poets. Some of the noteworthy personalities who have pushed against the grain in the United Kingdom and have emerged as very successful persons. Mr. Andrews, the first Black Studies professor in the UK. Mr. Palmer, Chancellor of the Heriot Watt University, Scotland's first Black university professor. Linton Kwesi Johnson, Black Panther activist and noted poet. Dyke, Dryden, and Wade, Britain's first Black multi-million-pound business enterprise. Kai Miller, poet, fiction writer, and a Campionite at heart. Dion Abbott, Labour Member of Parliament since 1987. Stuart Hall, cultural theorist and political activist, voted one of the 100 greatest Black Britons. Val McCallum, founder of The Voice, Black British weekly newspaper. Levi Roots, founder of Reggae Source. Lloyd Coxstone, sound system operator and record producer. Mona Hammond, actress. Naomi Harris, Bond movie actress. Don Letts, film producer. Maxi Priest, singer, and Michael Ward, TV star series, and of course, Steel Pulse, reggae band, and Grammy Award winners. All are British Jamaicans who have made important contributions to British life from the beginnings of the Windrush generation. Whilst there has been several reverence for the late Queen, the Windrush Jamaican descendants in Britain at home understand that the relationship between Britain and Jamaica remains one that is important to our growth and development. Last year, the government of Jamaica announced plans that would see a change, but notwithstanding that change, it is important to note how pivotal the relationship between Jamaica, the United Kingdom, and the members of the diaspora remains to us as a people and government of Jamaica. In closing, I wish to reinstate the story of the Windrush as one of triumph. Being here today among passionate Jamaicans, we remember that generation who boldly went where not many Jamaicans would have chosen to go at that time to leave their homes and families. We see them as heroes and heroines. We ascribe to those of the Windrush generation the honor and human dignity for which they fought. We ascribe to them the many changes over Britain in the last 75 years, and we welcome their contribution to the world. Unreservedly, I say, Jamaica is a true mother country for all who fly the black, green, and gold flag with pride anywhere in the world they live. Our blessings for all those who have made a valiant contribution to the development of the United Kingdom over the last 7 years, having done proudly so as Jamaicans. In this, we say thank you as we celebrate your story, our story, the history of our people united across the world. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Terry Long. We are now going to be treated to some music by the Alpha. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody was telling me it's the Alpha Old Boys band. No. Alpharians. Have no fear. I will accede to what you have said. Please put your hands together and welcome the Alpharians.
Yeah. Thousands of people are asking me how I spend my time in London City. Thousands of people are asking me how I spend my time in London City. Well, that is a question I cannot answer. I regret the day I left sweet Jamaica. I mean, you wouldn't pity my position because I nearly died here from starvation. But that is why Jamaica, Jamaica, our living and savior, darling Jamaica, you're bound to remember. Another thing that's bugging me is the food control in London City. They say you must have a ration book before you could put on something to cook. And my friends, the weekly ration so small, sometimes you don't see nothing at all. In a day or two you can show it all. But before I got to go back to Jamaica, but that is why Jamaica, Jamaica, my land and my savior, darling, you're bound to remember. During the winter in Great Britain, I miss Jamaica, that happy land. If I had wings like an aeroplane, I'd fly back to my blessed country again. There you see the sun shining every day, the lovely beaches at Montego Bay. These are the things that I remember. Me sweet ackee and saltfish in Jamaica, but that is why Jamaica is heaven and savior, darling Jamaica, Jamaica, I want you to remember. Many West Indians are sorry now They left their country and don't know how. Some left their jobs and their family, determined to live in London City. Well, they are crying out, they have nothing to do. Employment is here and they can't get none. But that is at home and they roam. They can't get the other to come back home. So darling, it's Jamaica, Jamaica. We bound to remember, darling. We bound to remember. Aye-oy! Aye-oy! Jamaica, Jamaica, amazing and savior. Jamaica, Jamaica, I want you to remember. Thank you.
Could listen to you all day. Goodness. That was nice. And folksy, as in folk music. Very nice. Let's hear it one more time for the Alpharians. And now we're going to throw some poetry into the mix. There is a very talented member, I mean, they're all talented, but for the person I'm about to introduce is an award-winning poet. And she's a member of the team here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Please welcome Anne Margaret Lim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I read, I just want to acknowledge everyone here, my ministers, and the officer in charge and everyone. Also want to acknowledge someone who just recently won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. He's here, he's from Jamaica, he's also from the diaspora in the UK. Kwame, big up. Woo! We're cheering for him to win the whole thing. Kwame McPherson, big up. All right, this poem is called One Summer, and it's for somebody whose parents are part of the Windrush generation, because the Windrush generation decades is from 1948 to 1971, and his parents are Windrush generation. It's One Summer for Stephen Lawrence. September 13, 1974, April 22, 1993. In the dream, Stephen, you're thicker than when we were young, but thoughtful as a first kiss. We had one summer in Kingston before England's white boys kicked, clubbed, knifed you. Too brief again this August light, its hours shifting, and hate, a hungry animal that only takes. The day your family stood above your grave, swept by coconut palms and a small bird orchestra. I smashed the shuttlecock repeatedly against my backyard wall, my grief knocking back against the day's blunt silence. What loves still lives, transforms my days each night, each decade passing. I follow you and return to the gate you towered over. That careless summer when you were just a boy, laughing against the sky, and I still believed in the light and what it makes of us. And I just want to add that his mom, as part of this, the Windrush generation, has done and has contributed a lot to, fight racism in the UK. So the Windrush, they're doing a lot.
Thank you very much, Anne Margaret Lim, for that warming peace. It's time for us to introduce our panel discussion, Reflections from Kingston Harbor. And so we're going to invite our panelists to take up their positions on the platform. We're going to start with Dr. Hilary Hickling, Senior Lecturer, UWI. Welcome. Dave Goss, Director, Institute for Caribbean Studies, UWI. Senior journalist for the RGR Gleaner Communications Group, Mr. Earl Moxham, who is also author of Vantage Point, a Reporter's Chronicle. Director, Curator of the Jamaica Music Museum, Mr. Herbie Miller. He would have appreciated that because he's music in his bones from birth until now. Right. And from Making Connections Work, I haven't seen him. I'm sure he's here. Where is he? There he is, Mr. Rudy Page. So we're going to ask, starting with you, Dr. Hickling, I'm going to ask you to give us your opening sentences, or salvo, maybe not. Right. Opening sentences.
Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I will stick to the time which I have been given because I have to go and pick up someone this afternoon. But I want to say that the sea is the backdrop of today's presentation. And I look out at the sea, and I remember when I looked through the door of no return in Ghana, and I had the most terrible feeling of angst and tears, because I realized that the journey that continued here started a long time ago. I am not a weeping woman, but I felt like weeping at that time. I also felt like weeping yesterday when I realized, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And I want to thank these musicians who have taken this message in their hearts to England and across the world. So I start in Ghana, and in fact today I'm wearing clothing befitting of Africa Liberation Day. Because you see, if we think the journey started here, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. The journey started and came here. Do you know that Kingston was once one of the largest slave ports in the world? So the movement of jazz people, the exoduses, are continuing up till right now. And so I want to say, when I spoke to Miss Lashley, and by the way, I love librarians because my mother was one of the pioneer ones. We need our people to know themselves, to have their history inside of their heads. And perhaps because I'm now a retired widow, I can speak freely. I want to say that part of my journey was spent in Birmingham, England, where my late husband, Frederick Hickling, and I worked with the mental health services. Many of you will know that there is a commonly held view that England makes people mad. I now believe it is true. And by that madness, I mean the impact of racism, the impact of generations of anonymity, the impact of the kind of racism that has resulted in a number of things, including the current laws. But it has also resulted in resilience, people finding ways of surviving even in the most hostile conditions. Incidentally, I've just come back from Trinidad, which is where Lord Kitchener came from. And do you know his song, which was sung, "London is a Place for Me"? He went on to be to write the music for the Ghanaian national anthem. So we have to think about Africa, we have to think about the Caribbean, and we now need to think about Europe. The person who is helping us to do this, believe it or not, is Louise Bennett. And when I spoke to Miss Lashley a few years ago, when the University of the West Indies was about to have its 70th anniversary, I said, what are we doing for Windrush? And sadly, we weren't doing much because of our amnesia and our ahistoricity. We forget who we are, and we have serious problems which come from that. So, when I went to Birmingham and as a very mature student wrote the following PhD thesis, "The Quest for Healing in the Black British Community, a reflective study of mental health care in Birmingham, England." So I went to mental hospitals, I went to prisons, I went to all the kinds of places where our people suffer badly. Okay, so Louise Bennett then says, which is how I'm putting my thing today. "What a joyful news, Miss Mattie. I feel like my heart going bust. Jamaican people colonizing England in reverse. By the 100, by the 1,000, from country and from town, by the shipload, by the plane load, Jamaica is England bound. Them a pour out of Jamaica. Everybody future plan is to get a big time job and settle in the motherland. What a island, what a people, man and woman, old and young. Just a pack them bag and baggage and turn history upside down. Some people don't like travel, but we show them loyalty. Them all are open cheap fare to England agency. And week by week, them shipping off, them countrymen like fire, to immigrate and populate the seat of the empire. Uno see how life is funny? Uno see the turnabout? Jamaica live for box bread out of English people's mouth. For when them catch a England and start play them different role, some will settle down to work, and some will settle for the dole. GN say, the dole is not too bad, because them paying she £2 a week to seek a job. That suit her dignity. Me say, Jane will never find work at the rate how she look. For all day she depend on Fanny couch a read love story book. What a devilment a England. Them face war and brave the worst, but a wondering how them going stand colonizing in reverse. When Miss Lou wrote that in 1982, I think, she couldn't have portended, I think that's the right word, what was to come. So, 40 years later, 2 generations later, we are dealing with the consequences, the sequelae of that experience. I'm going to be saying that the things that Miss Lou spoke about are still current. However, there are some additional things that we need to address. I am also part of the church's Reparations Action Forum, because we really have to ensure that the payment for the wrongs is done. That's one. Secondly, I think we need to learn more about our diasporas. I think there's a great deal of ignorance mutually between the people overseas and the people locally. and I think we have to do much more about it. I think we need to change the narrative because we indeed need to look at triumph over trauma. And ultimately, I think we need to be able to sit and talk with each other about the business of Jamaican migration. Have you passed the passport office recently? Have you seen the US Embassy in Ligani? The fact is, Jamaicans are always on the move. And part of what was happening in 75 years ago was that the people across this region were fed up and tired of the oppression and all the reasons why people go to make life elsewhere. Things have not changed much. And so I want us to sit and be thoughtful, not only about receiving the people's blood, sweat, and tears by way of the remuneration, but to think about why are people leaving this country and this region in such droves. So the things that Ms. Lou said are still current. I am very happy to look at the sea, but I tell you, when I looked through the door of no return, I wept because I realized that my own ancestors had come here against their will. I also realized that we are going to have to make atonements in Africa, in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and in Britain. Let me close with this comment. Thank you. I thought we had a 10-minute time.
No, in terms of the mic.
Oh. All right, so I will have to leave here by 15:15. When I leave, it's not because I'm being rude, but I have another commitment elsewhere. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hickling. And now let's get Dave Goss's perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much. This is some slides from a paper I'm preparing for a Windrush conference, actually the end of June in London. The title is The Caribbean Church, Windrush, and Christianity in Great Britain. It was inspired by this particular article. I teach, one of the many courses I teach is Caribbean church history. And this particular article I found in from Christianity Today. It says, in reality, that the black majority churches actually are saving Christianity in Great Britain. So he further points out that churches outnumber pubs now in the UK. And if you know UK is a place for pubs. When church outnumber pubs, you know, it's significant. And these are black churches now. He further points out that over the last few years, the number of traditional churches where members have dropped to 39,000, 16% less than 20 years ago. But the black majority churches now consist significantly of new members. So in reality, it is the black church that is actually the face of Christianity now in England. The literature-based, well, my research question, two research questions I had, I'm wrestling with. The first question is the extent to which the Caribbean church, who became part of the Windrush generation, their impact in UK. And I frame the question that way because in the Caribbean, it is quite clear that missionary theology, conservative missionary theology, still controls especially the evangelical section of the church. I also wanted to find out the extent to which now the Caribbean church then, they're able now to develop what is called real roots and shaking off the kind of white missionary theology that have been part of their tradition here. So having gone to England and faced racism, the extent to which that now reshaped the Caribbean church in England. So the literature describes three phases of the black church in England. The first phase is the indigenous movement of black persons in England, early 19th century. Second phase is really the focus of my paper, Caribbean Migrants, up to 1980s. That's the section I'm focusing on. And the third phase is the more interesting phase, really, because the African churches since 1980 have kind of taken over Christianity in Great Britain. It's actually called reverse evangelism. So the Europeans went to Africa, Caribbean, Asia. Now Africans are now coming to England in droves, and the largest churches in England today are these African churches in the last 15, 20 years. So that's the third phase. But the second phase is part of my part of project, the Caribbean church. And that is not static in terms of, because there have been continuous movements of Caribbean Christians going to Britain. So in terms of some of the churches, and I'm trying to get this thing to move and it's not moving, I'm not sure why. In terms of some of the churches, I've gone too far now. Some of the churches, in terms of the dates of these churches and the time they started, Calvary Church of Christ, 1948, New Testament Church of God, 1953, Western Holiness, 1958, Church of God of Prophecy, 1953, Elim Pentecostal, 1958, Assemblies of God, Apostolic Church, Community Church of God, that's the church I'm associated with, Arden, Alice, Indiana, 1960s. Also, the Moravian Anglican Methodists have also had break off, or what they call white flight. So they are part of the Methodist Moravian Anglican churches, and within a few years, it become now a fully black church. So these are the churches that is focus of my particular presentation. In terms of the impact, of course, positive impact of these black churches, Caribbean black churches. On the one hand, they provide a space, an important space, an important outlet for Caribbean Christians in UK. In addition to a part of space, they have contributed significantly to the educational system, also social housing, helping youth and gang violence, domestic abuse, food banks, as some of the positive changes that these churches have actually introduced in UK. Also, the arts, they have done very well in the arts. A number of important persons, they have actually contributed, and we heard some of the names a little earlier. Moving on to the negative impact, I must make the point then that negatively, these churches, they were able to organize themselves as independent bodies, but they are still, the organizational structure is still very similar to what they came out of. So say a New Testament Church of God, for example, same kind of organizational structure, just at this time now it is done by the Jamaican migrants in the UK. So that's one of the negative impact, that they were not able now to reshape that part of the organizational structure. Then they still continue the conservative theology taught in the Caribbean when they were here, although they are now independent, and this is despite. And it's interesting because some of the scholars do make the point about dance hall and church hall, in a sense, in England, are very, very similar as is here, and wrestling with racism now, how does that play a part in it? I conclude quickly that although they are provided spaces, and this is a similar critique to what I call a Pentecostal church here in the Caribbean, these churches provide a very important sociological space for Caribbean migrants, helping them to acclimatize to a new condition, provide them with resources and all of that. Also, what is also interesting to know that there's what you call a Pan-African meeting place, because these Caribbean churches now consist of not just Jamaicans, Antiguans, Caribbean people, African people, Afro and Indo-Caribbean people, and also Africans. So it's a good melting place of Pan-Africanism. But the theology of still emerging predominantly is still very much conservative, not engaging the missionary theology. So I conclude, therefore, then, that despite there are many positives, but there's still a good way to go as we have here in the Caribbean, where we need to engage the kind of conservative missionary legacy that was handed to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goss. And now, my colleague, author, senior journalist within the RGR Gleaner Communications Group, and we did tell you he's also author of Vantage Point, A Reporter's Chronicle. Let's hear Earl Moxham's side of the story.
Thank you, colleague, friend, Durban Malcolm. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I have breached protocol a little bit in terms of coming to make my presentation from this point, just for convenience. Now, I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from the book just mentioned, and it's from the chapter Colonial Whirlwind. And the decision to select that choice of name for the chapter is derived from the not so subtle passage from the book of Hosea, chapter 8, verse 7. And it says in part, "For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind." Now, during his address to, and this is taken, this chapter starts with the visit of UK Prime Minister David Cameron to Jamaica in 2015. And so let me commence this reading from a section of that chapter. During his address to the Jamaican Parliament on September 30, 2015, David Cameron also acknowledged the tremendous role that Jamaicans and others from the Commonwealth Caribbean had played fighting alongside British soldiers in the two world wars, and their invaluable contributions to the rebuilding of the UK after World War II, pointing particularly to their part in building, and I quote, "our great services like the NHS," unquote. The profoundly sad irony of the Windrush scandal of 2018, therefore, could not have been starker in its contrast with those warm words delivered in the Jamaican Parliament 3 years earlier. It was, incidentally, while the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference was being held in London in April that year that the scandal broke, but it had been years in the making. Jamaica's Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, was among the leaders in the UK for the conference. Responding to questions from Piers Morgan on the Good Morning Britain show, he said he welcomed the apology offered by Prime Minister Theresa May for her government's handling of the matter, then stressed that his administration's priority was to, quote, "ensure that the Windrush generation and the children of the Windrush generation get justice. If there's acceptance that a wrong was done, then there should be a process of restoration," unquote. In 1995, 23 years before the Windrush scandal, I traveled to England and interviewed a number of West Indian migrants and their children born in the UK about their experiences living in that country. With the benefit of hindsight, I was not surprised at the revelations of 2018, given the experiences they shared with me during those interviews. Aaron Buster Campbell, a Jamaican, arrived in Britain in 1961, and contrary to his rosy expectations, found the country inhospitable and hostile to him, principally because of his color. Like many other West Indians, he was turned away from most houses where he sought to rent a room. You couldn't get a room off the whites to rent. They told you that they don't rent to blacks, and that's the way it goes. He found this to be particularly dispiriting, coming from Jamaica where, according to him, if a white man knocked on your door in them days, no matter where he came from, you'd come off your bed and give it to him while you slept on the floor. that level of hospitality shown to a stranger in distress back home in Jamaica might have been the morally correct thing to do. But contrasting it with the treatment meted out to the Jamaican immigrant in Britain by his white counterpart was quite sobering. A generation later, in 1991, Desmond Sr., with whom I grew up in my hometown of Treasure Beach, moved from Jamaica to the UK with his young family, his mother having been part of the Windrush generation of migrants. Coming from deep rural Jamaica, where life was uncomplicated and racial differences were not a factor, they were in for a rude awakening when they set foot down in the land of their fantasies. When we spoke in 1995, he and his family had endured 4 years of discomfort with their place in this new society, learning to cope with attitudes ranging from casual indifference to bullying and outright racial abuse. The couple's eldest son was particularly traumatized by the treatment meted out to him by a white classmate who constantly taunted him with drawings of a monkey, which he told the tormented child was a representation of his mother. The indifference of his teachers to the bullying only made matters worse. He felt isolated, sad, and angry. The death in 1993 of the Jamaican Joy Gardner, while bound and gagged in the custody of the police, had only served to confirm Desmond Sr.'s view of the British police as a body hostile to the interests of minorities, having been let down by them in his own appeal for their intervention. I had an instance in which I had to call the police on my neighbor, and once the officer realized that my neighbor was a white guy, he didn't want to hear anything more. It was dead there. Then there was the murder of Stephen Lawrence, a teenager of Jamaican parentage, by a group of young white thugs while waiting for a bus in Eltham. The less than professional handling of the initial investigation by the police and Crown Prosecution Service was heavily criticized and condemned. Sir William Macpherson, in his report arising from the 1998 public inquiry related to this case, concluded that the Metropolitan Police Service was institutionally racist and recommended a number of reforms. Richard Mahon was born in the UK to Grenadian parents. When I visited the UK in 1995, the West Indies cricket team was on tour, playing a test series against England. Richard had no conflict of interest in determining which team to support. It was clearly the West Indies, he said without hesitation. The UK had given him no reason to feel any sense of loyalty to the land of his birth in that contest on the cricket field. It's only my birth certificate that says I'm English. Otherwise, I'm full West Indian. Because if I'm on the street and a white man sees me, he'll just label me a black, this or a that or the other, he explained, adding, because I'm not white, he doesn't see me as an Englishman. That's how their minds work, ain't it? Black youth in Britain were reportedly then dropping out of the school at record rates, with a corresponding increase in their share of the prison population, as disillusionment with their lot in that country set in. Over time, that has set in motion a policy of harsh punishment for offenders from this community, with the ultimate sanction being deportation to the land of their birth if they were not born in the UK, no matter how young they were when they arrived. Cameron, during his 2015 visit to Jamaica, came with a controversial proposal to contribute £30 million towards the construction of a new prison in Jamaica, as long as this country would agree to take back its nationals locked up in the UK to complete their sentence here. This was ultimately rejected with the change of government in 2016. One of the most controversial deportee flights, which arrived in August 2021, had echoes of the Windrush scandal, when it was found out that a few of those intended to be deported were possibly part of the Windrush generation and should now be benefiting from protection against deportation. Jacqueline McKenzie, attorney at law with the firm Lee Day and the Center for Migration Advice and Research, was one of the leading voices against this and other deportation flights. On Radio Jamaica's Beyond the Headlines, she told the host, Dion Jackson Miller, that the optics of shackling and cuffing black people and putting them on planes and sending them back to countries they don't know had become a source of great frustration and outrage. Norman Manley was Premier of Jamaica in the short-lived West Indies Federation when he led a regional delegation to Britain in 1958 to speak up in defense of West Indian migrants who were facing various forms of discrimination and racial abuse, culminating in the Notting Hill riots. Upon his return to Jamaica, the Premier reported his findings in a national broadcast, saying he had found opinion divided and confused. There was a strong mood in favor of restricting immigration, and every sort of excuse was being put forward for what had happened, he said. There was talk about housing problems and unemployment and the bad conduct of a small handful of migrants who let down their own people by their bad behavior abroad. You cannot put out a fire if you don't know what is burning. I found there are people in deep distress, anxious, worried, unhappy, full of uncertainty about the future, confidence in the world about them broken down. We visited, we held meetings, we gave counsel. I told our people to be patient and strong, and to exercise and maintain every right they possessed. I told England that they were there to stay, that they had a right to be there, that the West Indies and the world looked to England to put this thing right, to end violence, to build back confidence, to enlarge understanding, to make tolerance prevail. Manley ended his broadcast on Radio Jamaica with words of both caution and optimism. The events of the last 3 weeks have made history. It will not be the first time that out of evil, good may come. We have proved we can take care of our own. We will do it again if the need arises. We have caused many men to think and to face up to what is wrong and to stand up for justice and right, unquote. That need arose a decade later when Hugh Shearer, early in his tenure as Prime Minister of Jamaica, visited Britain in 1967 and again asserted the right of the Jamaican government to stand up for its nationals facing racial and other forms of abuse in the United Kingdom. Asked by the BBC whether this might not be considered undue interference in the internal affairs of another country, he firmly disagreed. Not at all. With due respect to that convention, it could never have been intended that the terms of the convention should deprive another government of taking special and keen interest in the welfare of its nationals in whichever country they may reside, unquote. That, he said, would remain the position of his government, which reserved the right to speak up again in the future if the need should arise. That need was clearly evident in 2018 and has hardly receded since. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moxa. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Herbie Miller.
Good afternoon. I too am more comfortable here than sitting there. Well, today being African Liberation Day, I want to remind us all that 2 days ago on the 23rd, in 1832, our national hero Sam Sharp was hung by the British for standing up for the rights of enslaved people. So let's keep that in mind as well. In discussing the Windrush, allow me to begin with the presence of black people in late 18th century Britain. In fact, I want to think of what we're doing today as far as I'm concerned, that this memorial for me is both a celebration and a lamentation. In other words, it's as vibrant as ska, but at the same time, it touches us like a blues. 18th century historical narratives, including poems, songs, and paintings, reveal a large black presence in London and indeed across Britain, which is a little known historical fact, unless it's one's personal interest. Over 150 years before the Windrush, quote, in October 1796, ships from the Caribbean carrying over 2,000 black and mixed race prisoners of war docked at Portsmouth Harbor. Soon almost all of them were imprisoned at Portchester Castle. Their presence must have caused as much anxiety as the Windrush did in 1948. I again quote, having survived a journey during which 268 of their compatriots had succumbed to disease and the cold, the prisoners faced an unknown future, end of quote. But they were not the only black people living in Britain at the time. A broad contribution from slaves to paid servants and much more resided in Britain. Although they did not enjoy the same freedom as whites, the black population made their presence felt as communities of sailors, servants, tradesmen, children, and hunting companions could be found in Southampton and Portsmouth. As one report stated, quote, in the neighboring village of Brandine, John Ripon, a black servant to the Earl of Powys, left the large sum of £63 to his fellow servants and others, as well as £71, 17 shillings and 9 pence to the poor of his parish on his death in 1800. In his will, he described himself as a gentleman, a term that couldn't be applied to most black people living in Britain at the time, end of quote. And before the Windrush, Jamaican and other Caribbean musicians, artists, and regular residents had made their home in Britain. They include the alto saxophonist Bertie King, trumpeters Leslie Jiver Hutchison and Leslie Thompson. Leslie Thompson left the constabulary and went to Britain and pursued a doctorate, which he did achieve. And by the way, all the musicians that I will reference are Alpharians, each and every one of them. Thompson would go on to achieve his doctorate, yeah. But it also included people like Una Marson, who did the war reports and Calling Back Home from the BBC, who set the pace for people like Andrew Salke and Louise Bennett, among others who followed suit. She was a writer, journalist, playwright, and an advocate for women. Indeed, she also wrote speeches for Emperor Haile Selassie when he was in exile in Britain. There are many others, such as craftsmen and artists who lived in Britain. Yet, as we fast forward to 1948 and the end of World War II, as Britain attempted to rebuild, following being virtually demolished by enemy bombs, and as much as black people were encouraged to go there and help to rebuild, they too found the mother country not as hospitable as they had expected, and were also as alienated as the previous black Caribbean immigrants. If one examines the passenger list of the SS Empire Windrush, professionals ranging from carpenters, draftsmen, welders, mechanic, fitters, seamstresses, seamen, cabinet makers, among a long list of others, which also included cultural professionals listed as painters, singers, musicians, and the potter Cecil Baugh. Culturally, these artists and their compatriots introduced cultural activities that kept them together as a community and enrich Britain's cultural landscape. On the Windrush were outstanding musicians, including the trumpeter Dizzy Reese, 93 years old and still living in the Bronx. Dizzy was the first person, if not the only, signed to the Blue Note record label on the recommendation of Miles Davis and Donald Byrd. He cut quite a number of albums for Blue Note as well. He organized festivals both in Britain and on residence in New York. He set up the New York Jazz Festival, Dizzy Reese. It also included Sam Walker, who recorded with Dizzy in Britain, Granville Edwards and his brothers, and Delroy Stevenson of the famous Commodores Orchestra that used to play at Silver Slipper Club in Crossroads. On board was also pianist York de Souza, who had already migrated but was home in Jamaica, and he took the opportunity to grab a ride on the Windrush back to Britain. Post-Windrush, we have the great Joe Harriott, who changed the face of music 5 times. Before Stan Getz played Bossa Nova, Joe did it. Before Ornette Coleman did his double quintet, Joe had what he called India jazz fusion with the Indian classical pianist, I'll tell you his name in a minute, and his jazz group coming together to make this cultural combination. Today we just simply call it world music. He did so many other things, I won't go through much more. But it also includes a young man from Alpha called Harold Little G. McNair, whose first gig was with Quincy Jones's orchestra in 1948 in Paris, France, with the great Melba Liston, Jimmy Cleveland, among others in that band. It included Sonny Gray, who wrote film scores in Paris, France, and arranged for Eric Dolphy, among others. Gilly Heron, the father of Gil Scott Heron, was the first black professional baller in Scotland. Gilly Heron, Jamaican. So Gil Scott Heron's dad is Jamaican, even though Gil Scott Heron was born in Washington, D.C. But Gilly Heron also played center forward for Jamaica before migrating. He was an athlete, meaning track and field, among other things. Socially and politically, the Windrush generation had to deal with thugs like the Skinhead or Bory Boys. And as my friend Sash in Ladbroke Grove once told me, he said, when the Bory Boys attacked, they didn't know much about fling stone. They knew knuckle dusters and blackjacks. So when we used a dagger and dig out the brick out of the road, when my brethren fling the 10th one, the first one never land yet. So, you know, when you sit down with these old-timers, you get a good sense of what our grandparents, great-grands, and in the case of many of us, our parents, went through when they took the Escania and the Begonia some years later. It was then 75 pounds and went to Britain. And as far as the Windrush generation goes, my generation can remember we used to get the compiled Daily Mirror in a yellow jacket, the whole week's supply, to read about what took place in county cricket and football and etc. But there were ads where you could buy shoes and pants length. And because our grandparents and parents were there, you write the letter. They don't answer you until close to Christmas. The postman turn up with a little piece of white paper, and you're dying for tomorrow morning to go up to Windward Road Post Office to get the parcel. Most of the time, by the time they respond to the shoe size that you're drawn on a piece of paper, the shoe's too tight. But you hop along a bit and you push it off, but get back your foot in it after you push it off. What's the problem? The wool clothes that they sent were so hot, but we still dress up and go dance. So we celebrate much of what took place there. 1950, the test match at Lord's. West Indies beat England for the first time. And as my friend sang earlier on, the king was there to see. So Alan Ray gave him a century. I'm going to your school, I think, you know. Woolmer's, no? Woolmerian or Campion. Campion doesn't and cannot play cricket, run fast, nor kick ball. Woolmer's can do it, though. And Alan Ray was at Woolmer's. Sorry about that, my brother. But you guys have something else going for you. And so while the king was there to see, Ray gave him a century. Of course, between Ramadan and Valentine, they took 19 of the 20 wickets which could have been taken. So with those little pals of mine, who? Ramadan and Valentine. Continue on the cultural tip, by the early 60s, a little girl who said she could climb banana trees. She must have been a banana Katie, that little bird that we see up there. Her name was Millie Small. My Ball Lollipop was a huge hit. Emil Shalek was a Jewish British immigrant who set up a label called Blue Beat. And he started releasing Jamaican ska songs from Prince Buster, Derek Morgan, Don Drummond, the Scatterlights, Rico Rod Ricketts, among others. And that's why in Britain, ska is called Blue Beat. We don't have Blue Beat in Jamaica, we have ska. Followed by people like Desmond Decker and the Aces, among others. Britain now got a full taste of what Miss Lou talked about. Because people like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, among others, started to go to Jamaican blues dance and got their stuff together. Rico Rodriguez, great trombonist, was recognized by Buckingham's Palace, as Peter Tosh would put it, with an MBA. So did Linton Kwesi Johnson. Mr. Zephaniah, Benjamin Zephaniah, decided he would not take it in protest to the chafing relationship between Britain and the colonies, to include Jamaica. Chris Blackwell started his island record, and Lee Goptel, I think Lee was from Guyana, started Trojan. And of course, the rest is history. Jimmy Cliff, Toots, the Wailers, and so many others. Till now, it might be argued, or it is argued by some, that others are doing reggae much better than we are. That's an argument we can continue with. On the streets, we had Jamaicans such as Lucky Gordon. Anybody know that name? Lucky Gordon. Lucky Gordon was what we call in the vernacular a pimp. He had two women, one called Mandy Rice Davis and one called Christine Keeler. Yes. They almost brought Britain, the British Parliament, to the ground because they were servicing all and sundry, from the Soviet Union to the British, to the Americans, to the Europeans. And you know what kind of chat can take place when that sort of situation is activated. And so we don't know how much secrets might have been divulged. So it was a huge thing. The Scatterlights made a song of it called Christine Keeler and one called Scandal. Chris Blackwell made a film about the whole situation also called Scandal. The Notting Hill riots resulted in the introduction of the Notting Hill Carnival, and black British culture through people like the father of cultural studies, Stuart Hall, and people like Evan Jones, the man with the Banana Man song, by the way, who just passed a week or so ago, wrote scores for TV and work with the BBC and so on. So singers and musicians who arrived before, after, so before, on, and after the Windrush have had to deal with the ills of Britain as much as they have contributed tremendously to the growth of Britain and its culture, not to exclude sports in all of that. Today it is amusing to look at every one of these sides, perhaps with the exception of Portugal, when they field a team, whether it's in the World Games, the Olympics, or the World Cup, to count us who went there to rebuild as the majority of players on these teams. Gordon Grittins was born in Britain, but he could not represent the MCC. Thank goodness he couldn't, because today he stands as one of the most brilliant opening batsmen for the West Indies. There's an album called London is the Place for Me. It includes many who arrived on the Windrush. Songs such as the opening song by Lord Kitchener, London is a Place for Me, Young Tiger, 1953 at Queen Elizabeth's coronation. I was there at the coronation, he sings. As liaisons between immigrants of different races start to emerge, he made a song, Lord Beginner made a song called Mix Up Matrimony, because that created a whole other kind of vibe. Kitchener made a song, say, my landlady is too rude, in my affairs she wants to intrude. Every time he takes somebody to his apartment, she tell him, you can't do that. But come Monday morning, Mr. Pay me the rent. Of course, Victory Test Match 1950, The Mighty Terror, No Carnival in Britain, and the Underground Train was so new to them. And of course, racism, again, Kitchener, he sings, if you're not white, you're black. And when they couldn't take Britain any longer, of course, he came back to sweet, sweet Jamaica to his ackee and saltfish. I will close on a serious note, though. Today, we're talking about reparations. We're talking about relinquishing ties with the monarchy and republic status. And these are very, very, very important, especially to you, Madam Minister. And it's post-haste that we should go down that road, including the Privy Council, Brother Lawyer, so that we can basically now address and control our own destinies. We ought to graduate from that system, and I'm an advocate of that graduation. Thank you.
And in cricketing terms, not the night watchman, but a key member of the team nonetheless. Please welcome Mr. Rudy Page.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Given that I was told no speeches, in fact, I would be regarded as a child of the Windrush generation. But the challenges around those descriptions, and much of what I'm going to talk about, is there's a generational shift, because my father left Jamaica 1955, the holy parish of St. Mary, I should add, Harmony Hall, Highgate St. Mary. And now, my generation, we have grandchildren. So I think there needs to be some rethinking in terms of how Britain is described, the descendants, such as myself. And in fact, we did celebrate the departure day yesterday, but in future, we will be talking about Descendants Day, because there's always a time when we need to move on. Now, the program that I'm responsible for is called the Windrush Anchor Heritage Education Program. And given the comprehensive nature of what we've heard today, I think it's important that I really set out clearly what that program is about. Because, as I say, in a sense, I believe we're also witnessing, as part of the 75 anniversary, the passing of the baton from the first generation. My father's still alive in Maypen, he's 87. There's lots of second generation taking care of those very same people, but that generation are not active. Our generation is our second generation, and in fact, many of us are mentoring the third generation and the fourth generation. So I think it's really important for Jamaica to start to really understand there has been a generational shift, and the way we go about doing business is very different to our parents. We've been fortunate to have the information. We understand the mysteries of leadership. Many of us have worked all over the world, and we even have, I must acknowledge, Martin Livermore, who's here, working with the Home Office, dealing with some of the issues around the Windrush compensation scheme, and he's here to ensure those voices are heard. And when the scandal first broke in 2018, I was one of the first people to put together a program in partnership with the Home Office to ensure that Church of God of Prophecies, churches all over the country would provide information, advice and guidance in partnership with the Home Office after the church services on a Sunday. Patrick Vernon, as well, of our generation, he's been a supreme activist in terms of tackling issues relating to the Windrush scandal. But what we don't want is for our generations who's grown up in the UK and our children and our grandchildren to be described in a manner as not being able to work out what to do. Because generations before us, wherever they found themselves, yes, this may not where we wanted to be, and if we had a chance, if we had a choice, we wouldn't have started from here. But most importantly, we work together, we reach a consensus, and we make the decisions that translate into workable plans. Now, to describe the program, Windrush Anchor Heritage Education Program, it's a unique community-focused initiative showcasing a life-size replica of the vessel, as you can see there, the Windrush Anchor. And it actually celebrates the Caribbean Commonwealth community's cultural heritage and contributions to the United Kingdom. And that's including the wider Caribbean Commonwealth. When we talk about the Caribbean Commonwealth communities, that's all the English-speaking islands, plus Guyana and Belize on the South American mainland. So the program's objectives are to engage wider communities on the Windrush heritage and develop innovative educational approaches to raising cultural esteem and pass on a legacy to young people by providing opportunities for them to play a key role in shaping cultural outputs. So the Windrush front room, for example, if you lived in the UK during the 1960s and 70s, there was a front room that if you're a young person, it was very dangerous to go in there, for those of you who remember that. And in Harlesden, northwest London, there's a WISE education project where they actually have that room as a room of remembrance. It's now called the Windrush Legacy Room. But also on a serious point, what is important about it in terms of the community mental health and well-being of people of Caribbean descent is that when they go and sit in that room, it brings back great memories. It brings back memories of hope, because our program is designed as a program of hope, strength, and belonging. And that's why we use the anchor. And that iconic picture you can see of the anchor right at the front there of the ship. So we actually use an exact replica of that. And in fact, the anchor with the stand is about 15 foot high, so we just use the top part. Now, this program is rooted in the values of respect and inclusion and belonging. And as you've heard today, that's one of the key things that everybody requires, regardless of their background. So our approach is that we always talk about the values of respect and inclusion are the common ground for all, regardless of background, culture, or status. And that's a challenge that you can find anywhere in the world. And we think it's important to come up with plans and activities that help people to learn to understand and appreciate that. And one of the best places to start is in our neighborhoods. So the conceptual framework that holds all this together is designed to inspire inclusive, peaceful, caring, and enterprising neighborhoods and local communities. And what we've done with that is then link that directly to Jamaica's National Development Plans 2030 and also the National Diaspora Policy. So both those plans have shared goals, and that's around the importance of human potential development, security and justice, a prosperous economy, and also a healthy environment. So this now is part of our 7-year project of activities or program of activities that are clearly linked to the development of Jamaica in terms of human capital, knowledge transfer, learning, and we've got schools, Augustown, and I'm going to say a few words about Augustown. So Augustown Primary School is now linked with a school in Enfield, North London, called Kingfisher. Grants Pen Primary School is linked with a school in Enfield called Woodpecker. Now, the importance of what I'm talking about in terms of communities, and again, in the role of the diaspora, for many years, we've been involved in the transfer of medical equipment, school equipment, a tremendous amount. And what we feel is important now is how can we better contribute to the development of young people within Jamaica from a system point of view. So what we've done, we've devised a series of festival and activities called the Windrush Anchor Festival. And a couple of days ago, we did the very first one, and it was called the Windrush 5 Communities Anchor Festival in Augustown. And I'm very pleased, Dorothy Maitland is here from Augustown, representing African Gardens. So please give her a clap. It was a very important event because when we first agreed to get involved in Augustown, many people said, what are you doing in Augustown, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Again, not thinking about respecting people and individuals regardless of background, culture, or status. And I think for the diaspora, it's really important because, again, over the next 7 years, Jamaica has 775 communities that make up Jamaica, and every one of those communities have members of the diaspora somewhere in this world. And the other important point of using the National Diaspora Policy, that's been a good opportunity to link the UK, USA, and Canadian diaspora. So we all work closely together. And with the growth of digital systems, we host a lot of US and Canadian content on our Fresh FM Radio London digital station, and we share content across all the programs. And also, we are full supporters of the Global Jamaica Diaspora Youth Council, and we're really pleased to see the progress that Nat Pete is making. He's of the 3rd generation. So I think I would like to see some rethinking from the academics in Jamaica in terms of giving much more clarity and definition about what is currently going on and what is being delivered across diaspora communities. I must commend Dervin Malcolm, right? Because again, Dervin has a lot of contacts across the diaspora, and he understands the collaboration and the progression, most importantly, that's being made. So I think some of the academics need to speak to Dervin and get a better understanding what's going on in terms of UK, USA, and Canada within their delivery systems, whether it's health, education, any sports science even. It's very rarely mentioned how many people from the second generation now are involved in sports science, in engineering, focusing on the 21st century learning and skills agenda, which of course is creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. So all these types of knowledge transfer and knowledge activities are rarely or never mentioned within any narrative within Jamaica. So I certainly would like to see some clarity and definition from the academics coming to the UK, have a better understanding, coming back to Jamaica, and then again helping to shape people's thinking about the successive generations in terms of where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy Page. I'll send you the check a little later on. Seriously though, yeah, I'm in. Dr. Hickling, you wanted to right away pick up on something that was said by Rudy Page.
Yes. I hope everybody here knows that the most, famous Black Briton was Mary Seacole. I have not heard anybody call her name this afternoon. But believe it or not, the war in the Crimea is going on again. So we're looking at cycles in history, and we are needing to understand. You know, I heard some people talking about Florence Nightingale, blah, blah, blah. However, I think we also need to speak about Mary Seacole. And you know, Mary Seacole's house is right up the road. Who knew that? Wonderful. Yes. And I want us to be able to become better informed, maybe because of being a librarian's daughter. That the lack of information is really crippling us, because there is so much fake news and so much, I can't use the word I was thinking of a while ago, but we really need to be better informed about ourselves. And so I hope that this today and the work that is being promoted, there will be much more of it. I have learned so much this afternoon myself, and unfortunately I do have to go, but I shall continue to be in touch with dear Miss Lashley, who I speak to from time to time. Sometimes I believe it's a thankless task to be involved in the promotion of knowledge in the society, because there's such an antipathy to it. I mean, can you imagine being fully dunce? I was stunned to hear of this concept at UWI. I said, what do you mean? That you want to say you're an idiot? So I am saying, let us get fully bright. Thank you.
Just a very quick response, and I'm really pleased that you mentioned that, because I was actually the project manager for the Mary Seacole Centenary celebrations on behalf of Guys and St. Thomas, and actually was responsible for ensuring that the first Mary Seacole exhibition was actually in the Florence Nightingale Museum. And in fact, this year is the 218th anniversary of Mary Seacole, so I'm pleased. And I've always been surprised that, again, that Mary Seacole has not been acknowledged, particularly with the amount of nurses that have, left here in the wider Caribbean and the contribution that they've made within the UK. So hopefully, going forward, if somebody can convince the Nursing Association of Jamaica to adopt Mary C. Cole, that would be a great help, I think. Thank you.
Yes. Wait for the mic, because as it is now, it looks like you're promoting a brand, the way you're holding the bottle. So.
Yes. The Mary C. Cole Foundation, this group of us, we pressed and pressed and pressed. Finally, November the 24th is the birthday of Mary C. Cole. Can I tell the young people here? If you have something that you believe, work on it in the face of every adversity and hostility, because eventually you will overcome.
Okay, can we have a round of applause for our panelists, please? And it's time for questions. Yes, I see a hand is up. Let's get it. Who has the... I have one here as well.
Good afternoon. A question for Rudy. The Mona Lisa Hutchinson from Albion St. Thomas. The Grand Spend Primary School you mentioned, is that the one in Albion St. Thomas?
Certainly is.
Thank you.
And given next year, so just very quickly, so to the 2 days ago when we did the Windrush Five Anchors Festival in Augustown, and we call it, the 5 communities, and we call it 5 communities because there are 5 communities that actually make up Augustown, and that related to Alexander Bedwood. So next year, in Mesga Gardens, Grants Pen area, and St. Thomas, our focus is Paul Bogle. And those of you, if you know your history of Jamaica, all those times ago when Paul Bogle did his march on the courthouse, people from the Albion estate marched from there and supported Paul Bogle in his demand for fairness and treatment. So the answer is yes. Dr. Gillian Jackson, and she in fact came down from Grants Pen with some of the students and supported the event in Augustown. I should also mention had teachers from Arnott's Gardens and also the NEAT project in Westmoreland.
Thank you for that. You might also want to know that my wife and I were very instrumental in refurbishing the library at the said school some years ago.
Excellent. So we're going to build on your work. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes? The front here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And perhaps this is a question for Mr. Page, Rudy Page.
Would you mind standing, please?
Okay. So I was in the UK earlier this year, I think in January, and I had the opportunity to go to Waterloo Station and to see the fabulous monument that was done by our artist. I was really overwhelmed. It was brilliant. It really captured the essence of the Windrush people. There were so many angles to see. And the words, of course, you called and we came, was just very powerful. And for me, I just wonder if the feeling that I have, the sense of pride that I feel seeing this monument, how is it viewed by the younger generation of perhaps the Windrush descendants in the UK? Do you feel that it is valued? Do they understand the significance of this monument and what it means for Jamaicans, for them? How is it viewed?
Yeah, that's a good question because put in context, some people may be indifferent, but for some people who understand UK and its history and any kind of monuments and the type of people historically that have been given solid monuments such as this particular one, despite the location, there is a sense of pride and progression because there's a reality, there's a historical reality. We are where we are, but I think it's an important part of progress. And in time, young people, as they better understand the history of Caribbean people within the UK in particular, they're going to appreciate that there is at least recognition of the contribution made by Caribbean people in the UK. And we know the largest population group are Jamaican, but again, we're always careful with our words when we're talking about the UK and the Caribbean community, because again, as I said, we want to be inclusive regardless of background, cultural or status. So yeah, there is overall a sense of pride that as a community and the contribution made to the UK, we should be recognized. We shouldn't be invisible, and we wouldn't accept being invisible because of that contribution that we made.
Gentleman at the front here.
Thank you. It's on? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Many people would not know that Dervan was my head boy at Calabar. I wanted to say thanks to Minister Johnson Smith for hosting us here, and to my former Minister of State. Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure. My question is for Dr. Goss, who also gave the sermon at the National Labour Day service. You mentioned the churches in England, especially now the black churches and the growth of them, exponential growth. Did you find that there were any references to churches that are revival churches? And what's the growth of that? And I ask because we are putting forward, Minister, revival in Jamaica to be nominated to UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage.
Thank you so much for that question. And the short answer is actually no. But I'm interested in the question because I asked myself the same question about Bedwardites. Okay, you know, my book on Bedward, and I'm wondering as well, you know, if persons have been able to record that history. Now, there are a number of groups who are actually doing a lot of oral testimonies. And with the Moravians, they're doing, and actually that's completed. They're doing a lot of these oral testimonies, and I'm still trying to follow, you know, different groups, but I have the same interest as you, and if I find it, will I find it? But obviously it has to be, right? Now, one thing also though that it might not necessarily be called revivalism as we know it, because you're gonna have now the merger between the Africanness and, you know, there's a similarity when Africans do worship. So we won't necessarily revivalism, right? But it's something I'm also interested in, and we can do footnotes as well. But thank you for the question. Yeah. It's a lovely question.
Just to say that there are a number of revival churches in London. They might not be called that, because a number of our revival bishops here go up to London all the time. They have churches there. We have a record of that. And maybe because, you know, revivalism, you just have to have a seal, and you can have it in your basement, church in your basement, and so on. But we have record of a number of churches.
So a lot of work, we have to do a lot of work on that. I'd really love to be a part of that.
Sorry about that. Coming back to you, just a quick one, just to say that the Honorable Minister has apologized. She has another engagement, and so too the State Minister. So thank you. Thank you for coming. I mean, yeah. All right, who was next in line for question?
Well,
gentleman
yeah,
there.
if the Honorable Minister is going and the other person from Ministry of Culture, there's very little I have to say.
Okay.
I'll speak to Rudy Page, after this event.
Okay.
But my main concern is where the funds coming from to get your project going, especially with the proposal to develop African Garden Village to what it ought to be. And I don't know of how much money has come from private, individual, or government who has paid a whole lot of money to their own ministers as 250% salary increase. And unless you have that money to do it, then it's all just talk, it's all just promise, like many things in this country, and it has no consistency, and it has no up and going.
All right, let's have Mr. Page respond.
Right.
And how much is the British government also has put into this project?
He's responding now.
Right. I don't speak on behalf of the British government. No access to the Treasury at all. But the Augustown Festival that you came to, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is about community development, human potential. I don't have any idea about the infrastructure of Augustown. That's just not my area. Our area is community development. So what you saw when you came down on Tuesday was, the activities within the community, recognizing those who were what we call trusted messengers, servant leaders, who do their best to take care of the young people and put them through school. People like Dean Roden, a stalwart of Hermitage, now in the US, but runs online classes for young people every week, ensures that there's donations that go in to support the community. So we're about community development, and that's our focus within the neighborhoods and local communities.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Page. The lady in the white dress and jacket, or is it cream? It's like cream.
Very pleasant good afternoon to our Honorable Minister Johnson, who have just left, and to all the protocol here today. It is our intention as a community in Augustown, in African Garden, when we are putting on our function, we are community. This is just my passion. This is part of my life, to do community work. Not for any money or for any handout. Coming up in my life, my mother and my grandmother, they are community person. And whatever they did, I have engrafted it. And I have been doing community work at the age of 14-year-old. And my mother and my grandmother, they do farming. And whatever they have achieved, and we do natural juices, we do pastry, we do wedding cakes, and what I have achieved from her, I give it back to my community in growing up. So doing community work, when doing anything for the elderly and for the children, it is a great pleasure of doing it. and you have to show your leadership. You have to be trustworthy. And first, you have to be trustworthy of yourself in whatever you are doing. So, in all the years I've been doing my community development work, nobody pay me. I take it on my own, I borrow loan, and I carry on my business and repaid it back. Doing all of this, we have a farmer who went into African Garden through community development, through Mr. Robert Campbell, Sonia Lambert, the Secretary for the African Garden Land Development. They have came to Arbor Heights where I were, and they saw my work. So they brought me to African Garden in Augustown, and there I continue my work. I'm a minister of religion of the Sunrise St. Michael Healing Temple Church. I form a basic school in Bayshore Park, which we name it now Harbor Heights. And that is my first development of developing a community. I went into Ministry of Education, and they accepted my proposal, and we have that basic school, which I have started. I use plastic bag and cardboard to build that school.
It sounds like you've been doing a whole lot of work. You perhaps would need your own program to be able to detail all that you're doing. Congratulations, well done. Can we give the lady a round of applause, please? Real community activist, well done.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you too, thank you. All the best.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Luther Irving, and I'm all the way from Montego Bay. I was invited here by Mr. Page, who sent me this lovely piece of document from England, Domino World Cup, 30 years of celebration. Indeed, we'll be hosting some English domino guys here next month, in June. And so I'm looking forward for who left over here, who live here, to come on over into St. Anne's, over in Kingston Garden Town, and Witter Village in Montego Bay. I just want to say here to all of you folks here, welcome to Jamaica. You all look so pretty, man, to tell the truth, you know. The last time I was in England, I was about there at the same time when that lady, Joy Gardner, got mugged and killed. And so I was on a radio station, you know, lashing out about what was happening there. And luckily for me, I got out of it safely. They almost came to deport me. I didn't know those guys know where I was. But I was on this radio station in Luton, BBC Radio 2, with this guy named Manny Zeke. And so I was asked the question, what do you like about England? I said, man, I don't know, but I can't understand what is happening here. Because here is it, a girl, a lady from the West Indian, overstayed her time, and they went to take her home, to deport her, and gagged her, and she was killed. There was another incident where I think was another black guy. He had some problem with the white guys they were talking about, and he went to the police, reported the incident. On his way home from the police station, they attacked him, and he killed one of them. And they kept him in custody to say then that he's a threat to the country. There was another incident at about the same time where a robbery took place. The sole eyewitness said that it was one black man and two whites. They took in three black guys and they kept him in custody. So I was on this radio station, you know, to vent my disgust. The following morning, two young cops came to my door. I was staying, you know, knocked me up. So I went and I said, what do I do for you guys? He said, oh, man, you don't make those slow remarks about the English, man. You can get me deported. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll be right back. So I went inside because I was leaving the next day to go back to Germany. So I said, okay, I'm leaving anyway. Give me a ride to the airport. They said, no, man, but you know. So I said, okay, cool. Now, anyway, fast forward to what I wanted to say here now. I'm in the mood of promoting Domino. Domino. Tourism Domino. And I wanted to encourage all of you here to let us pay some attention to it, because actually we want to take into the schools, primary schools, to teach these kids how to play domino and to become professional players. Because what I found out was that the Chinese invented domino 1,300 years ago. And what they had said in their invention was that they wanted to teach skills and concentration. Now we're having a lot of problems all over the world about youngsters. And I implore all of us to pay some attention to take our domino into schools, primary school, so that we can start to teach these kids the importance of to concentrate on what they're doing.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much for sharing. One last question. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Oh, there's somebody. Well, I'm.
Yeah. Good afternoon, panel and everyone here. My name's Cleon Roberts. I'm a child descendant from the Windrush generation. I part live in the UK and have come here to live in Jamaica and invested, and my family have brought back and invested in Jamaica. But, you know, we're talking all about, you know, I'm hearing some wonderful stories and from my experience and knowledge of what happened with the Windrush story. But my question is probably to Rudy Page. Are there any plans to, for the story to be taught in schools and universities, or, you know, on sort of development and what's the plan in terms of funding? You know, it's all well, we're all here, and there's going to be 76, there's going to be 80th anniversary, but I find from, pardon, sorry? Right, Dr. Goss. So I found from my experience from living here, from, you know, my father, my parents' experience and talking about it and speaking to Jamaicans, they really don't know about it at all. There's quite a few Jamaicans that don't know about the Windrush story here. So what are the plans in place? Are there plans in place for, you know, this story to be part of the curriculum in schools and universities? And also, you know, we talked about heroes. Where can this information be placed?
Very quickly before Dr. Goss comes in, as I mentioned, we do have part of the Windrush program, Windrush Anchor Heritage Education Program, educational exchanges. I mean, one thing that's happening in the UK, there's a term they use, is the decolonization of the curriculum. So what that really means is hearing more of the stories and the voices from the history. And a lot of young people now are starting to learn, particularly about the Windrush story. And so having that linkage between the schools in the UK and the schools here in Jamaica, with the starting with Augusttown Primary School, Grants Pen Primary School, and also Padmore Primary School, and there will be others. So we're doing our bit. We're doing our bit. So I'll hand over to.
Thank you so very much for that question. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Les Johnson. He chairs the Windrush Museum. And he came to our university, and we actually been discussing the very same question that you're actually raising. How can we now put it in the curriculum? So we are going to the conference in London the end of June. Post that conference, we are trying to find a way now how it could be included in what we call migration studies. Because we have migration studies, but the Windrush experience is not a part of the normal migration, a lecture here and there. So we are actually trying to work it out at the moment. How do we now get it more involved in our curriculum at university and also now into high schools, right? So you have actually helped me to understand that what we are doing is a good thing. And I thank you for the question. So I know I'm on the right track because it's something now that is being done. It's being done. So thank you so very much for the question. And would love to probably liaise with you some more because we need more hands on deck in terms of influencing, not just university, but how we get it also now in the curriculum now in the regular high school structure where our kids currently don't know anything. But I mean, that's a different story, by the way, because I mean, when you think about even things like Garveyism, they're not being taught anything like that anyway. So we have a big deficit to fill, but plans are being made. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think you should be starting with the teachers, personally.
Yeah. Yes, as part of, yes.
Yes, I think Earl Moxham wants to come in here.
Well, I know this is about the Windrush story, but as you speak about the larger migration story, I think that one of the biggest gaps in our telling of that story from the primary school level all the way up is in reference to the movement of Jamaicans to Costa Rica. And if you think about it, around about 1915 or thereabouts, they were estimated at that time to be 50,000 Jamaicans living and working in Costa Rica at that point. Migration to Costa Rica started before the movement to Panama, for example, for the building of the canal. And that culture, that Jamaican culture in Costa Rica remains very vibrant today. And we're speaking earlier on about the presence of and the cultural influence and impact of Jamaicans in the UK. It is very evident in Costa Rica as well, in Port Limon and elsewhere in the region. And when the Costa Rican national football team plays in Jamaica, some of the names you hear, you would think that they were from right here, but they were born in Costa Rica. So there are so many migration stories that still need to be told.
But there's another quick thing, though, that I should have mentioned as well, that to some extent, migration, Windrush history is being taught, but not really taught under the rubric Windrush, right? So when we talk about music and dance and fashion and all that, and the transfer from England to here back to England, it's about Windrush, but we don't really call it Windrush. So how do we formalize it as a set part of the migration story in our curriculum?
Yes, I mean, that's the point. We need academics to give clarity and definition. So if the academics are at least doing that, then where would the progression be? Then how could we get the learning and knowledge transfer if the academics themselves are not clear and not recorded?
We're not clear about it.
Well, when I say not clear, because if we talk about evidence-based, research-based, and the development of policies, and then to be able to implement them, surely it starts with some clarity and definition from the academics.
Yeah, but that's a different. You're talking about a different.
Not context. Really, not in terms of implementation, because the policies that are being developed have to be implemented.
Yes, but
right?
And that's why I'm making the point that I mean, when you look at there's a big deficit we have in our education system generally.
Yeah.
Even what we should be talking about, even like Garvey and others, not being taught about. Period. So you're talking about going back, and the point that I'm making here is that we teach migration history, and as Earl is pointing out again, I mean, how do you specialize in? You could do an entire semester talking about Costa Rica and Cuba and Panama and all of that. So England is included.
True. But
in
somebody
that.
has to relate that to the 21st century.
Yeah.
Because young people need 21st century learning. So where are they going to get that 21st century learning, if not from starting at the academic level? That's my point.
And you also have grassroots education too, because remember now that what we do academically at UWI and other places, right, is that's on one level. But what we need more of are these community centers, and teach people about our history is somewhat different to some extent than what we do sometimes. Because we are training people to teach and to do all those kind of things as professionals. But you do need to have now, going back again now to these libation and these reasoning with our brothers and sisters in these communities. That's where also now the action also need to go as well.
All right, so considering captaining the Windrush, we want to hear from each of you as we wrap which direction we should be going into. Whenever you
forward to 2030. That's the National Development Plan. The more people that understand it in terms of improving awareness, understanding, and that is supposed to be a consensus document anyway.
Mm-hmm. Herbie Miller?
It's such a complex thought in terms of Windrush, Nicaragua, Central South America, post-emancipation, migration, up to the Windrush and beyond. That the educational system can hardly accommodate based on what it is today and the struggle to deal with the very basics of education. And so while we sit here and talk about migration subjects being taught, we have to be able to get beyond the basics of how we now elevate our minds to take on that level of study. Mm-hmm. And it is back to the British who left colonies such as Jamaica and the broader West Indies / Caribbean with a level of education. In the old days, they call it first year, second year, and third year. That was good for us, but on migration to Britain was not good for any job whatsoever. And so the educational system has not been retrofitted, so to speak, to accommodate curriculum that talk about our experiences, but my generation can talk fluently about the Tudor and the Stuart period. And by now, the younger generation can't even talk about that because not even that is taught. Perhaps you can tell us, Doc, at what level history is even taught at the secondary level before coming up to the campus there. And so we have to get the basics of education right for it to go up the ladder before we even start talking about tertiary education and what is taught there. Because I personally, as someone involved so deeply in culture, I'm really tired of theses and dissertations about blah, 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 and identity. Ray, and identity. And it all revolves around dancehall, reggae, so on and so forth. There are so many other things that is embedded in our history. For example, homophobia. Let's talk about why most of us view that way of life the way we do. It's because it's in our bloodline. It happened to us forcefully. It's not that not women alone who was raped. It's not women alone who were raped. Men were also raped. And so these things are in our DNA. It's in our historic memory. There are things about promiscuity. Why? the amount of women on slave plantations throughout the colonies was minimal to the amount of men. What do you think took place? And so these are levels of history that's not taught, because even the basics of history aren't taught. We're still going around saying Queen Victoria set us free.
Thank you, Herbie Miller. Earl Moxham.
I don't think the Windrush story can be entirely divorced from the movement for reparations today, because one thing affects the other. To a certain extent, the rush to go to Britain after World War II was due in part to the failure of the decolonization project and the failure of emancipation in terms of empowering the people financially and in terms of the educational transformation, etc. And so in the 21st century, I suspect we have to address some of those issues front on, and I know that there's significant resistance to that as well. And one of the things about the movement of Jamaicans to the UK which also helps to explain aspects of our history of colonization and enslavement has to do with the fact that there was also movement to Scotland, and the emergence of somebody like Sir Jeff Palmer, who is a hero to many in Britain and in Jamaica now because of the pioneering work that he has done in unearthing the role of Scotland in slavery and how the folks north of the border, so to speak, benefited from the British involvement in colonization and enslavement in Jamaica. Many Jamaicans grew up not understanding the extent to which the Scots, having become part of the Union, then had access to the colonies in the Caribbean, and the extent to which Scotland then enriched itself on the backs of the people of Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean. That reckoning has not yet been dealt with. So there's need for a lot more education. It is not just about what happened post-World War II and the Windrush generation.
Thank you. And finally, Dave Goss.
Yes, first I must make a point, coming from what Herbie is saying. One of the points is that history has been marginalized in our high schools, and we're seeing the impact of that. The fact the entire humanities, people are moving more towards the STEM, science, technology, and it's becoming unfortunate because the kind of grounding which we need is something that is being ignored. And so first of all, the relevance of history has to be re-advertised and redone for a person to understand that a story has to be told. Secondly, then, I would make the point then that in that story which needs to be told includes Windrush. And the story which has to be told now, not just in books now, because students are not reading anymore. We're talking about like films and documentaries. And that's one of the things though, that can be done even in the diaspora. That story needs to be told about the triumph of West Indian people to England and the trauma of the experience, but surviving and contributing back to the Caribbean. So that story has to be told. And then we now need to include more of those stories now in our curriculum so we can broaden the entire migration experience to see how we other people have survived and thriving, but also where we need to go for the future. So Windrush is a part of that story, and we are knowing more now about Windrush, but we need to know much more. And so a lot of oral testimonies need to be documented. A lot of work needs to be done. And last, it's important for us as a society to recognize that we have influenced them, they have also influenced us. So that cultural yes, interrogation between us and Britain is a living reality, a lived reality. But a lot of work has to be done, and we need now the funding to do that work, but also tell a story now in a new format, because young people are not reading, period, and that's just in history. And so we have a lot of work to do in the future, and hopefully we can include Windrush as a big part of the larger migration story.
Yeah, that's supposed to be the last word, but I see Rudy Page begging.
Just a really quick point. The point you made about cultural exchange is really important. UK Lovers Rock in the 1970s, again led by second generation, so they would have been in their mid-20s to early 30s, and that was Jamaican artists coming over to UK, producing that kind of music, and then the distribution and economic power of the UK promoting reggae worldwide. But just very quickly, Durban, I think it was around about 1997, 98, when Rex Nettlefoot gave a talk in the Jamaican High Commission in London, and then he spoke about the importance of using culture as a tool for development. Jamaica's cultural policy 2008 talks about towards a Jamaican cultural superstate. So why isn't culture then being used? Why isn't that then at the forefront to deliver that learning, the awareness, the education, the cultural self-esteem that we talk about all the time? It should
Sounds
be.
like it will continue to be a situation of celebration and lamentation, as Herbie Miller said. And so it is. Gentlemen, thank you so much. But the official thank you person is actually Miss Beverly Lashley, National Librarian at the National Library.
Thank you, sir. 5 years ago, Dr. Hilary Hicklin was on the panel. In our dialogue, she began speaking about the Windrush. I knew nothing about it then. And today, 5 years later, a lot more people know. And so at that time, the National Library of Jamaica, we reached out to the RJR Communication Group because we wanted more persons to know about the Windrush experience. And so I really want to thank Minister Grange and her team when they asked the National Library to actually take charge of the conversations that we're having today. We also want to be thankful, and if Minister Grange was here today, she would have thanked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for actually hosting us here today. We're grateful for that. I want to acknowledge Senator, the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Honorable Orlando Terrelong, State Minister. Well, he's moving between ministries, but we have it here because he represented Minister Grange as Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. I want to also acknowledge Ambassador Janice Miller, Officer in Charge here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Her Excellency, Ms. Judith Slater from the British High Commissioner to Jamaica. We have other heads of agencies here, executives, cultural leader. Of course, we have our event chair right here, Mr. Dervon Malcolm, and our esteemed panelists, members of the diaspora. When I looked out in the audience, I actually saw a range of persons who I met in UK some years ago at Brent, and they're all here with us today. So I want you to give them a round of applause. Welcome. Someone actually acknowledged earlier, Mr. Kwame McPherson. I have to single you out, sir, because he's the regional winner for the Commonwealth short story for 2023, and hopefully the global winner. So we're rooting for you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, one and all, good afternoon. So as we come to the close of today's distinguished lecture, where we both remembered, and some persons don't want to use the word celebrated, but we celebrated our forefathers who boarded the Windrush to rebuild Britain. And it is imperative that I thank all parties who made this forum a resounding success. I want to thank our major partners, as well as all those who form the local Windrush Committee. So we had the members from the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, I'm seeing Mr. Wilkes right there, and Mona Lee Gibbs. We have the church, Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. You guys mainly know it as the Anglican Church. The Jamaica Music Museum, Institute of Jamaica, we have representative in the audience. I saw Mr. Harrow here earlier, Mr. Herbie Miller. The Jamaica National Council for UNESCO, Dr. Maria Smith, and of course, Rudy Page, who came all the way from the UK, making connections work. Those were all part of our partners, and we met every week to get the week of celebration going. So we want to thank you all, because without them, we'd not achieve this level of intellectual stimulation that I'm sure you all appreciated today. To our moderator, naming you again, sir, Mr. Dervon Malcolm. He's a seasoned broadcast journalist, and he set the stage for today's proceedings. I would say he moved us seamlessly from one presenter to the other. Thank you, sir, for using your creativity, linguistics expertise, and knowledge on the topic to keep us engaged and excited. Thank you, Ambassador Janice Miller, who represented Ambassador Sheila Monteith, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. You provided a really delightful welcome. And I want to thank the ministers, Senator, the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, and State Minister, Honorable Orlando Terrelong, for their special remarks, both recognized in their presentation the importance of the Windrush legacy and the need for our stories to be told. Then, of course, we had our panelists. I've mentioned some already. We had Reverend Dr. Dave Goss, Director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies at the UWI Mona campus, Dr. Hilary Icklin, who is a migration researcher, Mr. Herbie Miller, Director of the Jamaica Music Museum at the Institute of Jamaica, Mr. Earl Maxim, which a lot of you don't know, and I'm going to boast, he's also a librarian, right? And he's now senior journalist at the RGR Communications Group, and Mr. Rudy Page, our diaspora consultant and the CEO of Making Connections Work. And it just so happened that all of these persons, we just merged together when we're working on this committee to get things going. They all give different perspectives of this engaging topic, or as Mr. Malcolm would say, both sides of the story. So thank you all for your presentations that were shared here today. The energy and passion in these presentations have now ignited the researcher within me, because I kept hearing people asking, what next? We have some great plans. So all these presentations today, of course, will be compiled in a book. There'll be a call for papers and for other persons who have interesting articles. I was hoping to see like a Emma Lewis today, because she has articles that she has written on the Windrush. So we're going to put a compilation together. But some persons say, who wants to read, right? So we're going to do a documentary. We've already approached the RGR Communications Group. We're going to do a documentary on the Windrush. And there's also an international composer who was here over the weekend, and he's going to do an opera, symphony on Windrush. So those are things to come, and you'll hear all about them. Exciting times are ahead. In the audience earlier, I want to single out also Cleo Roberts, her dad, Sonny Roberts. Right, Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller can tell you all about Sonny Roberts' work that he has done in the music industry. And I met him some years ago, but he passed about, 3 years now? Time is flying, right? So his daughter was here actually asking some of the questions. The day's event would not have been the same without the poetry reading by Anne Margaret Lim. She's a seasoned poet, yes, and she has contributed to the Jamaican Poetry Archive, which is at the National Library of Jamaica. I had to put that one in. It was a heartwarming piece. Thank you to the very talented band, the Alfarians. They were here with us at the church service yesterday. Yes, I have to single them out. They kept us entertained, carrying us down memory lane and all the genres of music. So thank you, guys. I want to give special thanks to the hardworking and devoted members of the staff at the National Library of Jamaica. Can you please stand, my staff? Mr. Rowan Green, Mr. Roddy Miller, Miss Lang, some of them are standing over there, believe me. They pulled it off, and I'm really, truly appreciate the efforts because they allowed me to sleep. I didn't have to worry. No, I didn't have to worry because they just got things done. To our audience who took the time out to join us this afternoon, and to our viewers who joined us online from across the globe, thank you. The National Library of Jamaica is committed to continue providing you with quality, engaging events and forums that will help to build the National Collection. Thank you all for joining us, and let's keep this Windrush conversation going. Thank you.
And all that's left for us to do is to thank National Librarian Ms. Beverly Lashley for thanking everyone. Thank you very much. Brother Malcolm. Sure. Inviting you to enjoy refreshments in the room next door. Please indulge in refreshments, please. Thank you.